Hi everyone, this is a slightly different video to the ones I normally do, and it's not really a history video, and I know that the title maybe sounds a bit odd, but it's not me saying that I own Wallsend, it's more me saying what my Wallsend is like. My thoughts and memories about my beloved hometown. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope some of my memories are what you remember too. The photos used were all taken by me or family members, and they just show different parts of Wallsend in more recent times. Of course, Wallsend wasn't always like it is today. I won't go back to the Roman times, as I'll leave that for another video. But in earlier times, or later times I should say, from the Romans, Wallsend was just a small village. The green, where Wallsend Hall would have been the biggest house around at the time, and a few other houses and farms dotted around the rest of the area. At one point, Holy Cross Ruins was the only church. Sorry, that's in the picture of the green. Yay, don't you just love my videos, how they're totally not what they're supposed to be? Not organised. So, at one point, Holy Cross Ruins was the only church around, but by the mid-1800s there were a couple of other churches, St. Peter's being one of them, and St. Peter's is still the oldest church in Wallsend, excluding of course Holy Cross Ruins. And it seems that there was also an awful lot of pubs around. I sometimes used to joke about the idea that there seemed to be a pub, a church, a pub, a church, but it was quite a lot like that. As the collieries arrived, so did more people and more houses, and a lot of open land began to take the shape of the town that we know now. Of course, the houses were much smaller, and most would have been pit houses or cottages, and it wasn't really until the late 1800s and the early 1900s that Wallsend really began to expand, with more and more houses and more shops on the high street. The expansion obviously happened because of the shipyards and the collieries, meaning more work for people, so they moved here from other areas for the jobs, obviously, and people always need, and still do today, somewhere to live. This, obviously, the picture on the screen at the moment is B Pit, which would have been around in the very early 1800s, and the ruins of this can still be seen down by Segadunum, because that is obviously what that photo is. Very hard looking at that to make out what it actually is based on the actual pictures that I've seen of B Pit, but there is a board down there next to it where you can actually go and have a look and read a little bit of the history of the pit itself, which is quite helpful. So, a lot of the census forms give you an idea of how many people came here from places like Scotland and Ireland. And it was also then that a lot of my family started to arrive here from other areas. And a lot of my family originally came from Kent, but some came from just over the south side of the river. It's probably true to say that the majority of people came from Ireland, which is why so many of us have Irish ancestors, me included, although I have only just found that out recently and thought that I was somebody who didn't have Irish ancestors, but I do. I can't really imagine it as dirt roads and just a few houses, but I wish I could go back in time just for a day to see what it looked like. But I can imagine it as having been a dirty time. Industry would have polluted the air, and as we know, buildings from the past used to be black from smoke damage. And it's not always just easy to see this in old photos, with them mostly being black and white. And a lot of old photos give the impression that the area was much cleaner then, but it really wasn't. There may not have been as much litter, but then we didn't have as much litter to drop, because naturally people burnt things on their coal fires, and we didn't have what you would call throwaway items, plastic bags and things like that. I have lived in Wallsend for almost all of my life, briefly living somewhere else, well, for 10 years, so not that brief, but I've always missed home, and as soon as I had the chance to return, I did. I'm not sure if I would ever leave again, as it really is home to me, and I can't describe the feeling I felt when I first moved back home after my time away. It just felt right. It was where I belonged, if that actually makes sense. This picture is of Laburnum Avenue. It was taken by my ex-husband, and that is actually taken from the doorway of the house that I lived on Laburnum Avenue. A lot of Wallsend people were born either at the Green or at Wilton Key Maternity Hospital, but I wasn't born at either. I was an awkward baby. And I don't mean that I was awkward in the sense of I was annoying, because that's just now. But I was in an awkward position, so I was born at Preston Hospital and moved to Wilton Key later. I grew up in the centre of Wallsend, as I've just shown you the photo of Laburnum Avenue, which is where I grew up. It was close to the park, and I spent a lot of my childhood playing in the back lanes, and I can still hear the sound of all the mums calling their kids in when it started to get dark. And I also used to spend a lot of my time in the park. This isn't really that old of a photo, but it is quite old. When I used to play in the park, obviously there wasn't a fence around the bowling greens, and you did used to play on the bowling greens even though you got wrong. And obviously this part of the park was where the putting green was that I used to go to with my dad, and I used to play there. So, you know, it was something that I spent a lot of time in the place. And obviously this is the old view of the entrance of the whole grounds when my mind just went completely blank. And that was another place where I obviously used to spend a lot of time when I was younger. It looks very, very different now, as most people who still live in the area will know. So I was always climbing on the old bit of the Roman wall that used to be in the whole grounds. And back then I didn't know what it was, and it was just something to climb on and jump off. And I'm sure lots of other people did that. And I also walked past Holy Cross ruins with my nana and the dog on the daily walks. Something else that I didn't know anything about, and she used to tell us ghost stories about it, and I'm sure that was just to stop me going there on my own at night or anything like that. And we often used to walk down the path at the back of the allotments near St Peter's Field. I wouldn't go anywhere near it now. It's a very narrow path with a very steep drop, but at the time didn't bother us, have no fear of things like that. But I certainly wouldn't go there now. And that's obviously a view of the burn taken from the Burn Bridge, and you can see Willington Viaduct just in the distance there, and you can just make out between the trees the top of the Rose Inn pub at the bottom of Rose Hill Bank, we'll say, because it's closer to Rose Hill Bank than it is to the bottom of Church Bank. I went to the Carville School and the Western and the Burnside, and of course many people will remember the Burnside as the grammar school, but the name had long since changed by the time I went there, so I never knew it as anything but the Burnside, with the tunnel from one side to the other where the lads would hoist snowballs at you through the gaps in the winter. And I think it was safer to go over the field and miss the tunnel. I remember so many shops from my childhood, it would be pointless to try and mention them all, but I do remember Milburn's, one of my favourite shops, which unfortunately it's on this photo, of course it wasn't there anymore, it had long since closed, but this is the part of Station Road where Milburn's would have been, and also Tompkins Record Shop, and Mayfair, where I went to get my ears pierced for the first time when I was about 12. And I can close my eyes and see inside of Milburn's shop as if I was really there. I can see the rows of comics and magazines and the glass counter opposite. And I remember that I used to get me Bunty comic delivered weekly from there as well. And as I got a bit older, I spent most of me pocket money buying sweets in there or records from Tompkins. And I do think that the first record I ever bought was Donny Osmond Puppy Love to play on my little record player in a case. I do feel old talking about records, but it's not that bad, as there were 45s and not 75s. And records do seem to be coming back into fashion a little bit at the moment. I also liked Woolies. It was a shop that seemed to be full of everything: sweets, clothes, toys, and a favourite place to go to drop your stink bombs that you'd bought at the joke shop further down the high street. And I can also remember trying to tell the time on the forum clock with its different time on each face. I'm sure that it did work when it was first built, And of course, who can ever forget the good old market lady in the forum, where you had to climb over the cobbles to hold a hand. And I don't know why everybody had to hold a hand, but all the kids did it. When I was a kid, she was outside the lecky board, which you can actually see in this photo, but now she's outside the Anson. She probably did need a few drinks after all of us kids had pestered her for years holding a hand. Of course, a lot of my memories of Wallsend are just really centred about my family, the happy times with me nana on our walks, days out, and just basically being a kid with no worries. So my memories of Wallsend are probably a little bit rose tinted, but that's how we all are, I think. I remember the buzzer at Swans and the men rushing up the bank to get home. I remember the sights of the big ships at Swans, as seen when looking down from Leslie Gardens, which was where my mum used to live. I also remember getting wrong for trying to climb over the railway lines, but as a kid we had no fear. And obviously this is me with my demonstration of no fear using a gigantic shovel. So that's a kind of brief look at my memories, and it's hard to see from that how or why Wallsend would mean so much to me. But I think it just means home. It's where my heart is. It's where the people are who are like me, who talk like me and think like me and love out more than a good laugh and a bit daft carry on. Wallsenders are definitely special. They have such a huge history, and the town has grown from something huge compared to how it was when the Romans arrived, that's for sure. Yes, it's changed over the years. Some things are gone and some things are new, but everywhere is the same as times and people change, just like they did when the town first started to grow in the 1800s. So we shouldn't really expect anything else in Wallsend, because while we can happily remember the past, we can't live in it. And people often ask why I do what I do and talk about Wallsend and go on about how great it is. Well, it's because I think it is great. We have an amazing history, so much more than I ever realised when I was at school, where I wish we had learnt about local history too. And it's something I think everyone should know about, our amazing history that is, of course. Knowing the past is knowing what shaped the town, and it's not always a good, happy history. We have some sad history, our colliery disasters and the loss of the shipyards. But as I said before, those are the things who make us who we are today. We are tough, we are Wallsenders, and this is my Wallsend.